Some moments in life are so unexpected that they leave a mark you can't erase. That's how it was for me the day Logan walked into my bedroom unannounced. It had been an ordinary afternoon. Martin, my husband, was at the office as usual. Logan, his son from a previous marriage, had recently moved back home after a rough breakup. We'd been tiptoeing around each other in the days since his return, careful not to step on old tensions. I was in my room, trying on a dress for an upcoming event, when I decided to change into something else. It was mid-change, just me standing in my underwear, when the door opened without warning. "Charlotte, have you seen?" Logan stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he froze in the doorway. I gasped, grabbing the nearest thing to cover myself. "Logan? I'm sorry," he stammered, turning away so quickly he almost tripped over himself. The door slammed shut, leaving me standing there, my face flushed with embarrassment and something else I couldn't quite name. It was a moment we both wanted to forget, but neither of us could. Logan's return to the house had thrown me off balance. Martin had suggested it without consulting me, though I wasn't surprised. My husband had always been quick to make decisions without asking how they might affect anyone else. "Logan needs a place to stay for a while," he'd said over dinner one evening, barely glancing up from his phone. "You don't mind, do you?" Of course, I didn't say no. Logan was polite, if distant, and we'd always maintained a cordial, if surface-level, relationship. But having him here, his presence a constant reminder of Martin's previous life, added an invisible tension to the air. At 25, Logan was handsome in a way that was hard not to notice. He had the same dark hair and sharp jawline as Martin, but his eyes were softer, more thoughtful. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that made his recent heartbreak seem all the more surprising. "He cheated on me," he'd said over dinner one night when Martin wasn't home. I'd made an effort to keep the conversation light, but Logan's bluntness had caught me off guard. "Oh, Logan, I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely taken aback. "Don't be," he replied with a shrug. "It happens." I couldn't help but admire his composure. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Martin was at the office, as usual, and Logan was supposed to be out running errands. I was in my bedroom, trying on a dress for an upcoming charity gala. The dress didn't fit the way I remembered, and with a sigh I peeled it off and tossed it onto the bed. Standing there in just my bra and underwear, I rifled through the closet for something else. That's when the door opened. "Charlotte, have you seen?" Logan's voice cut off abruptly as his eyes took in the scene. I froze, my hand still clutching a hanger, as his gaze flicked from me to the floor. His face turned crimson, and he spun around so quickly he nearly knocked over a lamp. I'm sorry," he stammered, backing out of the room. "Logan," I gasped, grabbing a robe to cover myself. The door slammed shut and I stood there, my heart pounding as the reality of what had just happened sunk in. For the rest of the day, I avoided Logan. I stayed in my room, pretending to be busy, though I couldn't focus on anything. The image of his shocked face was burned into my mind, and every time I thought about it, a flush of embarrassment crept up my neck. At dinner that evening, the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. "Did you finish those errands today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," he said, not looking up from his plate. Martin glanced between us, oblivious to the awkwardness. "I told Logan he should take some time off and figure out what he wants to do next," he said. "That's a good idea," I said, though my voice sounded far too bright. Logan finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate the hospitality," he said. "I won't stay longer than I need to." "Don't be silly," Martin said, waving a hand dismissively. "Your family." The days that followed were torturous. Every interaction with Logan felt loaded, as though we were both tiptoeing around an invisible line. He avoided being alone with me, and I told myself it was for the best. But despite my efforts to push the incident from my mind, I found myself thinking about it more often than I wanted to admit. One evening, I caught him glancing at me from across the living room. His gaze was brief, but it lingered just long enough to make my stomach flutter. I looked away quickly, pretending not to notice, but the moment stayed with me. It wasn't long before I began to notice small changes in his behavior. He started coming home earlier, spending more time in the shared spaces of the house. I caught him in the kitchen one night, leaning against the counter with a glass of water in hand. Couldn't sleep, I asked, keeping my tone light. He shrugged. Something like that. We stood there in silence for a moment, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. About the other day, he said suddenly, his voice low. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize, I said quickly. I shouldn't have just walked in like that, he continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. It was an accident, I said, my voice softening. Let's just forget about it. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine. Is that what you want? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. It's for the best, I said finally. He nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The tipping point came one evening when Martin called to say he'd be working late. I was in the living room, scrolling through a magazine, when Logan walked in. He hesitated in the doorway, as though deciding whether to stay or leave. Want to watch something? He asked finally, gesturing to the TV. Sure, I said, setting the magazine aside. He sat down beside me, the cushions shifting under his weight. For a while, we watched in silence. But the air between us crackled with unspoken tension. At one point, our hands brushed as we reached for the remote, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. He pulled his hand back quickly, his cheeks coloring. Sorry, he muttered. It's okay, I said, though my voice wavered slightly. The moment passed, but it left behind a lingering sense of possibility, one that neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. A few nights later, I found myself wide awake, long past midnight. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I got out of bed and wandered into the kitchen, intending to make some tea, only to find Logan already there. He was sitting at the table with a mug of coffee, his gaze distant. The soft glow of the under-cabinet lights cast shadows across his face, making him look older than his 25 years. Couldn't sleep either? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He glanced up, startled, before giving me a faint smile. Something like that. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, unexpectedly, he broke the silence. Do you ever feel stuck? He asked, his voice quiet but steady. Stuck? I repeated, tilting my head. Like you're just going through the motions, he said, staring into his coffee. Doing what everyone expects of you, but never really living for yourself. His words struck a chord I wasn't prepared for. I hesitated before answering. Yes, I said softly, more often than I'd like to admit. He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine. What do you do about it? I don't know, I admitted. I've spent so much time putting others first, Martin, this house, I guess I never thought about what I wanted. Logan's gaze didn't waver. Maybe it's time you did. The weight of his words lingered in the air between us, a challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to face. From that night on, things between us began to change. It was subtle at first, a shared glance that lasted a beat too long, a brush of hands as we passed each other in the hallway. One afternoon, I was in the garden, pruning the roses, when Logan joined me. Need help? He asked, crouching beside me. Do you even know how to prune a rosebush? I teased. Not a clue, he admitted with a grin. I laughed, handing him the shears. Well, let's hope you don't kill it. As we worked side by side, I felt a sense of ease that I hadn't felt in years. Logan's presence was calming, grounding in a way that surprised me. You're good at this, I said, watching as he carefully trimmed a branch. Beginner's luck, he said with a shrug. No, really, I insisted. You have a good eye for detail. He glanced at me, his expression softening. Maybe I learned it from watching you. The compliment caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. Later that evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, our hands brushed as we reached for the same plate. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. Sorry, Logan said, pulling his hand back quickly. It's fine, I said, though my voice wavered. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Charlotte, I looked up at him, my heart pounding. Yes? He seemed to struggle for words before finally saying, nothing. Never mind. But the tension in his voice told me everything I needed to know. My closest friend, Emily, was the first to notice that something was different. She came over one afternoon for coffee, her sharp eyes taking in every detail as we chatted in the living room. You seem distracted lately, she said, her tone casual but probing. Do I? I asked, feigning ignorance. Yes, she said, leaning forward slightly. And Logan's been hanging around more than usual. Everything all right? Of course, I said quickly, though my voice felt too bright. Emily gave me a knowing look. Charlotte, I've known you for years. I can tell when something's on your mind. There's nothing to tell, I insisted, though her words left me unsettled. That night, after Emily had gone and Martin had retreated to his study, I found Logan in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV. Mind if I join you? I asked, sitting down on the couch beside him. Not at all, he said, his smile easy. We watched in companionable silence for a while, the space between us feeling both too close and not close enough. Finally, Logan set the remote down and turned to me. Can I ask you something? He said, his voice tentative. Of course, I replied, though my heart was racing. Do you ever regret marrying my dad? The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. I don't regret it, I said carefully. But sometimes, I wonder if I made the right choice. Logan nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been wondering a lot about choices lately. I turned to him, my pulse quickening. Like what? Like what it means to follow your heart, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. The room felt impossibly still, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Before I could think better of it, I reached out and placed my hand over his. Logan, I began, but the rest of the words caught in my throat. He leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. You don't have to say anything, he whispered. The moment hung suspended in time, a fragile bubble that could burst at any second. But neither of us moved to break it. Just as the tension between Logan and me reached a tipping point, Sierra, his ex-girlfriend, reappeared. She showed up at the house unannounced one afternoon, her polished appearance a sharp contrast to the chaos she left in her wake. Logan, she said, her voice saccharine as she stepped inside. I've missed you. What are you doing here, Sierra? Logan asked, his tone wary. I wanted to talk, she said, flashing him a bright smile. I stayed in the kitchen, that out of sight but within earshot, as they spoke. I've been thinking about us, Sierra said. I made a mistake, Logan. I want to fix things. There's nothing to fix, Logan said firmly. Don't be like this, she pleaded. We were good together. As their conversation continued, a pit of jealousy formed in my stomach. That evening, Logan found me in the garden, tending to the roses. He stood silently for a moment before speaking. Sierra's not staying, he said, his tone resolute. I didn't ask, I replied, though my voice betrayed me. He stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. You don't have to worry about her. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. I'm not worried. You don't have to lie to me, Charlotte, he said, his voice soft. Before I could respond, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that it left me breathless. That night, the fragile thread holding us back snapped. After Logan's quiet reassurance in the garden, I felt a pull I could no longer ignore. The lines between what was acceptable and what wasn't blurred until they disappeared entirely. It started small, a lingering touch, a stolen glance. But it wasn't long before the secrecy itself became part of the allure. Every shared moment carried a risk, and with each one, the bond between us grew stronger. One morning, after Martin left early for work, I lingered in the kitchen, sipping my coffee. Logan appeared in the doorway, his hair mussed and his t-shirt slightly wrinkled. Morning, he said, his voice still heavy with sleep. Morning, I replied, my pulse quickening. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, his eyes studying me. You're up early. So are you, I countered, trying to sound casual. For a moment, we stood in silence, the tension between us palpable. Then, slowly, he crossed the room and sat beside me at the small breakfast table. Charlotte? He said, his voice low. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. Yes? His hand brushed against mine, the contact sending a jolt through me. I can't stop thinking about you, he confessed. Logan, I began, but he shook his head. Don't say it's wrong, he said softly. We both know it doesn't feel that way. I wanted to argue, to say something that would stop the spiral we were on. But instead, I let him take my hand, and the warmth of his touch silenced every protest I might have had. As the days turned into weeks, Logan and I became masters of deception. We found ways to be alone without raising suspicion, a shared moment in the garden, a quiet hour in the study while Martin was out. Each stolen moment was exhilarating, but it was also exhausting. The constant fear of discovery loomed over us like a dark cloud, and the smallest slip could unravel everything. Emily, ever perceptive, began to notice the subtle changes in my behavior. She stopped by one afternoon, unannounced, and caught me off guard as I was coming down the stairs. "Charlotte," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You've been avoiding me." "I've just been busy," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Too busy for your best friend?" she asked, her tone light but probing. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's not like that." "Then what is it?" she pressed. "Because something's going on, and I think I know what it is." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Emily's gaze lingered on me for a moment before she sighed. "Just be careful, Charlotte. Whatever you're doing, it's not worth losing everything." Her warning stayed with me long after she left. Sierra's presence became more frequent, much to my dismay. She appeared at the house unexpectedly one evening, her bright smile masking the calculated intent behind her visit. "I thought I'd bring dinner," she said, holding up a bag of takeout. "That's thoughtful," I said, struggling to hide my irritation. Logan's reaction was guarded but polite. "Thanks, Sierra, but you didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said sweetly. "I've missed us." The tension in the room was unbearable, and I excused myself, retreating to the kitchen under the guise of setting the table. From there, I listened to their conversation, each word twisting in my gut. "We could try again," Sierra said, her tone almost pleading. "There's nothing to try," Logan replied firmly. Her laugh was brittle. "You're hiding something. I can feel it." I held my breath, praying Logan wouldn't falter. "What I do isn't your concern," he said, his voice cold. When Sierra finally left, the relief I felt was fleeting. One evening, Martin returned home earlier than expected, nearly catching Logan and me in the study. We had been going over some paperwork, a thin pretext for the real reason we were there, when the sound of the front door opening sent us scrambling. "Charlotte?" Martin called out. "In here," I replied, my voice strained as I quickly put distance between Logan and myself. Martin appeared in the doorway moments later, his brow furrowing as he took in the scene. "What are you two doing?" "Logan was just helping me organize some old files," I said quickly, gesturing to the stack of papers on the desk. Martin's eyes lingered on us for a moment before he nodded. "Dinner's ready." As soon as he left, Logan turned to me, his expression tense. "That was too close." "I know," I whispered, my heart still racing. The constant hiding began to take its toll. Logan grew restless, his frustration with the situation bubbling to the surface during one of our late-night conversations. "I can't keep doing this," he said, pacing the living room. "Logan, please," I said, trying to calm him. "I'm tired of pretending," he said, his voice rising. "Of sneaking around, of acting like nothing's happening when everything is happening." I stood and placed a hand on his arm. "We don't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he said, his gaze intense. "You just have to decide if I'm worth it." His words left me breathless, but I couldn't give him the answer he wanted. Not yet. Emily's suspicions finally boiled over during one of our coffee dates. She set her mug down with a thud, her expression sharp. "Charlotte," she said, leaning forward, "are you having an affair?" The bluntness of her question stunned me into silence. "You don't have to lie," she continued. "I've seen the way you look at him." I swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. "Emily, She held up a hand to stop me. "I don't need the details. Just think about what you're risking, for him." Her words cut deep, leaving me shaken long after she left. Sierra's persistence reached a breaking point when she confronted Logan directly. I overheard their argument in the driveway, her voice sharp with accusation. "You're hiding something," she said, "and I'm going to find out what it is." Logan's response was calm but firm. "Sierra, you need to move on." "Not until I get the truth," she snapped. The confrontation sent a wave of panic through me. If Sierra discovered the truth, it would destroy everything. The day Sierra decided to escalate, everything began to unravel. She cornered me in the garden while Logan was out, her demeanor both saccharine and sharp. "Lovely roses," she said, brushing her fingers over a bloom as though admiring it. "Thank you," I replied cautiously, not trusting the glint in her eye. She turned to face me, her smile brittle. "You know, I've been thinking about Logan a lot lately. He's been different, guarded, secretive. Do you know anything about that? I forced a smile. Logan's been through a lot recently. I'm sure he just needs time. Sierra tilted her head, her expression turning cold. Maybe. Or maybe there's more to it. I'm not sure what you're implying, I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. If there is something, you should know. I won't let it slide. Logan deserves better than to get caught up in whatever this is. I didn't respond, but her words hung in the air long after she left. Later that evening, Emily showed up at the house unannounced, her expression stormy. Charlotte, she said, brushing past me into the living room, we need to talk. I closed the door, bracing myself for what was coming. Emily, now isn't a good time. Too bad, she interrupted, turning to face me. I've tried to give you space, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Emily, please, I began, but she shook her head. No more excuses, she said firmly. I know there's something going on between you and Logan. And if I know, how long do you think it'll be before Martin figures it out? Her words struck like a slap. You don't understand, I said weakly. Then make me understand, she said, her voice softer now. Charlotte, I'm your friend, but you're playing with fire and someone's going to get burned. Tears welled in my eyes as I sank onto the couch. I didn't mean for this to happen. But it did, Emily said gently, and now you need to decide what you're going to do about it. When I told Logan about Emily's confrontation, he was livid. Who does she think she is? He snapped, pacing the living room. She's my friend, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. She doesn't understand, he said, his tone sharp. No one does. Logan, please, I said, standing to face him. She's right. This can't go on forever. His eyes softened, but his frustration was still evident. Do you regret it? The question caught me off guard. No, I said honestly. But that doesn't make it any less complicated. He stepped closer, his voice low. We can figure it out. Together. For a moment I wanted to believe him, but the weight of reality was too heavy to ignore. The tension in the house reached a breaking point when Martin began to notice the cracks in our facade. It started with small comments, offhand remarks about Logan's lingering presence or my distracted demeanor, but it wasn't long before his curiosity turned into suspicion. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Martin's tone shifted. Logan, you've been spending a lot of time here lately, he said, his gaze sharp. Logan hesitated, glancing at me before responding. I've just been helping out around the house. Helping out? Martin repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm. That's interesting. I forced a smile, trying to diffuse the tension. He's been a big help with the garden. Martin's gaze lingered on me for a moment before he turned back to Logan. Maybe it's time you started looking for your own place. The comment hung in the air, and Logan's jaw tightened. Maybe, he said quietly. After dinner, Logan found me in the study, his frustration boiling over. This isn't working, he said, his voice low but firm. I know, I said, my heart sinking. I can't keep pretending, he continued, his tone pleading. I need more than this, more than stolen moments and lies. Logan, please, I said, tears brimming in my eyes. He stepped closer, his hands gripping mine. Come with me, Charlotte. Leave all of this behind. His words sent a jolt through me, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. The weight of my responsibilities, my marriage, and the life I'd built were all too much to ignore. Before I could make a decision, Sierra returned, this time armed with more than suspicion. She confronted Logan in the driveway, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the entire neighborhood. I know what you've been doing, she said, her tone venomous. Logan crossed his arms, his expression calm. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, she snapped. I saw you with her, Logan. I have proof. My heart sank as I watched from the window, her words a dagger aimed directly at us. If you try to deny it, I'll make sure everyone knows, Sierra continued, her voice shaking with rage. Logan didn't respond, but the damage was already done. Back inside, I found Logan pacing the kitchen, his expression stormy. We have to do something, he said. What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Sierra won't stop, he said, his jaw tightening. If we don't act, she'll destroy everything. But how? I asked, feeling helpless. I'll talk to Greg, he said firmly. Logan, no, I said, fear gripping me. Greg's dangerous. So is she, he countered. As he left the house, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. Logan returned late that night, his expression grim. The tension in his shoulders told me everything I needed to know. The conversation with Greg hadn't gone as planned. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. "He knows," Logan said finally, "about us." The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. "How?" "Sierra told him everything," Logan replied. "And now he's threatening to tell Martin unless we leave." I felt my breath hitch. "Leave? Together?" He nodded. "It's the only way to stop him." For hours, I paced the living room, torn between loyalty and desire. Logan sat silently, watching me with an intensity that only added to the weight of my choice. "What about Martin?" I asked finally, stopping to face him. "What about this life I've built?" Logan stood, crossing the room to stand in front of me. "What life, Charlotte?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "A life where you're invisible, where your happiness doesn't matter." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. "I can't just walk away," I said, my voice trembling. "You can," he said, cupping my face in his hands. "You just have to choose me." Before I could decide, the choice was taken from me. The next morning, Martin confronted me in the kitchen, his face pale and his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "Charlotte," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained anger. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" I froze, my mind racing. "What are you talking about?" He threw the phone onto the counter and I saw the screen filled with text messages between Logan and me. "Don't lie to me," Martin snapped. "I've seen the messages, I know what's been going on." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. "How long?" he demanded, his voice rising. "How long has this been happening?" I looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "Martin, How long, Charlotte?" he shouted, slamming his fist onto the counter. "Months," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. His laughter was bitter, almost cruel. "Months, while I was out working, building this life for us, you were." He trailed off, his voice breaking. Logan walked into the room then, his expression hardening as he took in the scene. "Martin," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't just her fault." Martin turned on him, his fury redirected. "Don't you dare try to defend her," he snarled. "You were supposed to be my son, and you betrayed me." "I didn't mean for this to happen," Logan said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around him. "But I love her." "Love?" Martin repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You think this is love? This is nothing but selfishness." The argument escalated, with accusations flying like knives. I tried to intervene, but my words were drowned out by the rising tension between them. "Get out," Martin said finally, his voice cold and final. "Both of you. Get out of my house." "Martin, please," I begged, but he turned away, his expression hard. "I don't want to hear it," he said. "You made your choice." Logan and I packed our things in silence, the weight of what we'd done hanging heavy in the air. As I carried my suitcase to the car, I glanced back at the house, the home I'd built with Martin, and felt a pang of regret. "Are you sure about this?" I asked Logan as we got into the car. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze focused on the road ahead. "Are you?" I hesitated, the enormity of what we were doing settling over me like a lead blanket. "I don't know," I admitted. Just as we pulled onto the highway, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Sierra. "Hope it was worth it." Attached was a link to a social media post, and when I opened it, my blood ran cold. The post contained screenshots of the messages between Logan and me, along with a scathing caption, "Some secrets can't stay hidden forever." "She told everyone," I whispered, my voice shaking. Logan glanced over at me, his expression darkening. "Let them talk," he said. "It doesn't matter anymore." But as the notifications began pouring in, I realized just how much it did. The fallout was swift and brutal. Friends and family turned their backs on me, their judgment harsh and unforgiving. Martin filed for divorce within days, cutting all ties and leaving me to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Logan tried to be my anchor, but even he couldn't shield me from the storm. The strain of our decision began to show, and the cracks in our relationship grew harder to ignore. One evening, as we sat in the small apartment we'd rented, Logan turned to me, his expression heavy. "This isn't what you wanted," he said, his voice quiet. I looked at him, tears brimming in my eyes. "It's not what you wanted either," I said softly. For a long moment we sat in silence, the weight of our choices pressing down on us. Finally, Logan stood and walked to the door, pausing to look back at me one last time. I'll always care about you, he said. But we can't keep doing this. And with that, he was gone. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. The whispers and judgment from those around me were constant reminders of my mistakes. But in the quiet moments, I found a sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I began to think about what I truly wanted. Not for Martin, not for Logan, but for myself. Looking back, I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could learn from it. And perhaps in time, I might find a way to move forward. The weeks after Logan left were the hardest of my life. The apartment felt impossibly quiet without him, and the weight of everything I'd lost pressed down on me relentlessly. Martin's absence, though expected, left a hollow ache. Friends I thought I could rely on disappeared, their judgment too heavy to hide behind polite conversation. But I couldn't afford to wallow. The first steps of rebuilding were painful but necessary. I took a job at a local art supply store, spending my days surrounded by bright pigments and blank canvases, symbols of potential, though I rarely touched them. It was Emily who reached out first. "I'm not here to lecture you," she said over coffee one morning. Her voice was softer than it had been during our last conversation, but her eyes still held a trace of caution. "I appreciate that," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "I just want to know," she continued, "are you okay?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm trying to be." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's all you can do." Months later, just as the wounds were beginning to scab over, a knock at my door disrupted the fragile peace I'd found. When I opened it, I froze. It was Martin. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with exhaustion. But his presence still carried the same weight it always had, filling the small apartment with an unspoken tension. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone surprisingly calm. I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. He didn't sit, instead standing by the window and gazing out at the street below. "I thought I'd hate you," he began, his voice quiet. "For what you did. For what you destroyed." I sat down on the edge of the couch, my hands twisting in my lap. "Martin, let me finish," he interrupted, turning to face me. "I thought I'd hate you, but all I feel is sadness. For us, for what we could have been." His words hit harder than any accusation. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said, my voice trembling. "I know," he said, "but that doesn't make it easier." We talked for hours, revisiting moments in our marriage that had gone unnoticed at the time, but now felt monumental. By the time he left, the anger between us had lessened, replaced by a quiet understanding. Logan's departure left a different kind of void, one filled with questions I couldn't answer. Where had he gone? Did he regret what we'd done? Did he think about me the way I thought about him? One evening, as I was closing up the shop, I found a letter tucked beneath my windshield wiper. My heart leapt as I recognized the handwriting. "Charlotte, I thought leaving would make things easier, but it hasn't. I still think about you, about us. I wonder if you've moved on, if you've found the happiness I couldn't give you. I hope you have. Take care of yourself, Logan." The letter was unsigned, but it didn't need to be. I read it over and over, each word stirring a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a small, selfish hope that I hadn't been forgotten. Inspired by the letter, I began painting again. At first, it was just a way to fill the silence, a distraction from the noise in my head. But as the canvases filled with color, I felt a part of myself return, a part that had been lost long before Logan came into my life. Emily stopped by one day, her curiosity piqued by the sudden burst of creativity. "These are incredible," she said, her eyes wide as she took in the paintings lining the walls. "Thank you," I said, a shy smile tugging at my lips. "You should show these," she said, her tone insistent. "I don't know," I began, but she cut me off. "Don't doubt yourself, Charlotte. You have something worth sharing." A year after Logan left, fate brought him back into my life. I was at a gallery opening, my gallery opening, when I spotted him across the room. He looked different, older somehow, but his presence still had the same magnetic pull. "Charlotte," he said, his voice soft as he approached. "Logan," I replied, my heart racing. For a moment, we simply stood there, the noise of the room fading into the background. "You did it," he said finally, gesturing to the paintings on the walls. "I had to," I said, my voice steady. "For myself." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I'm proud of you." We talked for hours that night, catching up on everything and nothing. By the time the gallery emptied, the air between us was filled with a quiet understanding. Logan didn't stay in town, and this time, his departure didn't leave the same ache it once had. Instead, it felt like the closing of a chapter I would always treasure, despite the pain it brought. As I stood in my studio surrounded by the colors and textures of my new life, I realized that while the past would always be a part of me, it didn't have to define me. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I never thought of Liam as anything more than Claire's son. For years, he was just a kid running around the house during my visits, tugging at my sleeve to show me his latest drawings or asking me 1,000 questions about what it was like to be a nurse. I'd always tease him about how he'd steal cookies from the jar when he thought no one was looking, or how he couldn't sit still long enough to watch an entire movie. But people grow up, don't they? That night, everything changed. It was after one of Claire's infamous family dinners. She loved hosting everyone at her house, friends, extended family, anyone who wanted to gather around her big oak table. By the time dessert was finished, the house was filled with the smell of apple pie and the sound of laughter, the kind of warmth that made me feel less lonely. But Claire had gone to bed early, claiming she was exhausted after a long day. Most of the guests had left, and Emma, Liam's younger sister, was out with friends. That left just me and Liam, standing in the kitchen with plates stacked in the sink and half-empty wine glasses on the counter. "You don't have to stay and help," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. "It's fine," he replied, his voice deeper than I remembered. "I don't mind." I glanced over at him and paused. There was something different about the way he carried himself, the way he stood just a little taller, his shoulders broader than they used to be. He wasn't the lanky teenager I remembered. "So," I said, trying to fill the silence as I picked up a wine glass to rinse, "how's the graphic novel coming along?" He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to make my stomach flip in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. "Slowly, but it's getting there. Maybe one day I'll actually finish something worth showing people." "You're talented," I said, glancing at him. "You've got nothing to worry about." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms as his eyes lingered on me a little too long. "You've always believed in me," he said quietly. The room suddenly felt smaller. I focused on the water running over the glass in my hands, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. "Of course I do," I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone. "I've known you since you were a kid. You've always had potential." "That's the thing," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not a kid anymore." I froze, my grip tightening on the glass. "Liam, I've been in love with you for years," he said, his voice steady but filled with something raw. "I know how it sounds, I know what you're going to say, but I need you to know." My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. "Liam, you don't mean that," I said, turning to face him. "You're young. It's not a phase," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. "You've been the one constant in my life, the one person who's always understood me. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him how wrong this was, but the words caught in my throat. Because in that moment, standing there with the weight of his confession hanging between us, I couldn't deny the truth. He wasn't a boy anymore. And the way he looked at me made it impossible to ignore. I've been friends with Claire for as long as I can remember. We met in nursing school, two young women trying to balance exams, internships, and life outside the hospital. Claire was everything I wasn't: outgoing, bold, and fearless. She made friends effortlessly, knew how to charm anyone in a room, and always had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the world. Over the years, we became more like family than friends. When I didn't have plans for holidays, Claire insisted I spend them at her house. She'd cook a feast big enough to feed a small army, and I'd bring dessert, usually store-bought because baking was never my forte. And then there was Liam. I first met Liam when he was 9 years old, a scrawny kid with big brown eyes and a mop of unruly hair. He was shy at first, always hiding behind Claire's leg whenever I came over, but that didn't last long. Once he warmed up to me, there was no shutting him up. "Do you think I could be a doctor someday?" he asked me once, his eyes wide with curiosity. "You can be anything you want," I told him. He grinned, then quickly launched into 100 more questions about surgeries and hospitals, his mind buzzing with possibilities. As he got older, his interests shifted. By the time he was a teenager, he was always hunched over a sketch pad, his fingers smudged with charcoal or ink. His art was impressive, even back then, dark and brooding, with an emotional depth that seemed far beyond his years. "He's got talent," I told Claire once after she showed me one of his pieces. "I just wish he'd spend less time in his room," she replied, rolling her eyes. "I swear, if I didn't make him come downstairs for dinner, he'd forget other people exist." But that was Liam, quiet, introspective, and always a little apart from everyone else. While Liam was growing up, I was busy with my own life. I'd been working as a nurse practitioner for years, a job I loved but one that left little room for much else. My last serious relationship had ended when I was in my early 40s, a mutual decision that felt more like a surrender than a breakup. We hadn't fought or fallen out of love, we just drifted apart, our lives pulling us in different directions. After that, I stopped trying. Dating felt exhausting, and I told myself I didn't need anyone. I had my work, my friends, and Claire's family, who treated me like one of their own. But deep down, there was a loneliness I didn't want to admit to. Liam had always been like a nephew to me, someone I cared about but never thought of in any romantic or inappropriate way. When he was younger, I'd tease him about his messy hair or his endless appetite, and he'd roll his eyes at me like any teenager would. But something shifted after he graduated college and moved back home. The first time I noticed it was during one of Claire's dinners. Liam was helping me set the table, his movements calm and deliberate. I asked him how his art was going, expecting the usual vague answers, but instead, he opened up in a way I hadn't anticipated. "It's harder than I thought it'd be," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Putting yourself out there, I mean, you spend so much time in your head, creating something, and then you're terrified people won't get it." I looked at him, surprised by his vulnerability. "I think people will get it," I said. "You've got something special, Liam. Don't let fear stop you from showing it." He smiled at me then, a small, almost shy smile that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't understand at the time. Over the months that followed, I started to notice little things. The way Liam's eyes lingered on me during conversations. The way he always seemed to find a reason to sit next to me at dinners or help me clean up afterward. The way he smiled when I complimented his work, like my opinion mattered more than anyone else's. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just being polite or grateful for the support. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Claire, of course, didn't notice. She was too busy managing her own life. Work, Emma's endless extracurricular activities, and her attempts to navigate the dating world after her divorce. But if she had seen the way Liam looked at me, I'm not sure she would have laughed it off as easily as I did. The turning point came one afternoon when I stopped by Claire's house to drop off a book I'd borrowed. Claire wasn't home, but Liam was, sitting on the porch with his sketchpad balanced on his knees. "Hey," I said, handing him the book. "Your mom left this at my place last week." "Thanks," he said, setting the book aside. "You want to sit for a bit?" I hesitated, but eventually sat down beside him, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. He showed me his sketchpad, flipping through pages filled with intricate drawings of people, animals, and abstract shapes. His talent was undeniable, his work raw and full of emotion. "These are incredible," I said, genuinely impressed. "Thanks," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about doing a series on people who've influenced me," he finished, his tone soft but deliberate. I smiled, looking at him. "That sounds beautiful. Do you have anyone in mind to start with?" He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the sketchpad. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost hesitant. "I was thinking about starting with you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to confront. "Me?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "Liam, come on, I'm hardly an interesting subject." "That's not true," he said, turning to face me fully now. "You've always been there. You've believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You're important to me." There was something in his eyes, a kind of intensity that made it impossible to dismiss his words as casual or innocent. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a strange mix of flattery and unease. "I'm just a family friend," I said lightly, trying to brush it off. "You're more than that," he replied, his voice firm. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I visited Claire's house, I found myself hyper-aware of Liam's presence. The way he moved, the way he looked at me, the way his voice seemed to soften whenever he spoke to me. It was subtle at first, easy enough to ignore. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to deny that something had shifted between us. I told myself it was nothing, just a harmless crush on his part, and misplaced curiosity on mine. But deep down, I knew better. The night of Claire's family dinner was the moment everything came to a head. By then, I'd spent weeks trying to push my feelings aside, convincing myself that it was all in my head. But when we were left alone in the kitchen, something in Liam's demeanor was different. He wasn't the shy, awkward boy I'd watched grow up. He was confident, self-assured, and there was a weight to his presence that made it impossible to ignore. "You've been quiet tonight," I said, breaking the silence as we washed the dishes. He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just thinking." "About what?" He set the dish towel down and turned to face me, his expression serious. "About you." My breath hitched and I felt a flicker of panic. "Liam, I know what you're going to say," he interrupted, stepping closer. "That this is wrong, that it's just a phase, that I'm too young to understand what I'm feeling. But I do understand. I've been in love with you for years, and I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this way." His words hit me like a freight train, leaving me speechless. I stared at him, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of which I could put into words. "You mean so much to me," he continued, his voice trembling slightly now, "and I know it's complicated, but I need you to know how I feel." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of the dishwasher and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Finally, I found my voice. "Liam, you're young. You don't know what you're saying." "I'm not a kid anymore," he said, cutting me off. "And you're not just my mom's friend. You're everything to me." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him how wrong this was, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just pure, unfiltered emotion. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I should have walked away. That's the thought that keeps coming back to me when I replay that night in my head. I should have set down the dish I was holding, told him this wasn't something we could talk about, and left the kitchen without another word. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, as Liam's confession settled into the space between us like a slow-burning fuse. His words weren't rushed or impulsive. They were calm, deliberate, the kind of words you don't say unless you've thought about them for a long time. "I mean it," he said, stepping closer. His eyes stayed locked on mine, unflinching. "You've been everything to me, and I can't keep pretending that's not true." "Liam?" My voice was a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," he replied, his tone steady but filled with something raw. "I've thought about it every day for years. You're the only person who's ever really seen me." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. There was no hesitation in his voice, no hint of the insecurity or uncertainty I expected from someone his age. Instead, there was conviction, an intensity that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in years. "This isn't right," I said, trying to sound firm but failing. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet but insistent. "Because of my age? Because of what people might think?" "Because I'm your mom's best friend," I said, stepping back slightly. "Because I've known you since you were a kid. It can't be." But even as I spoke, my words felt hollow. I don't remember exactly how it happened. One minute we were standing there, the tension thick enough to drown in, and the next his hand was on mine, gentle but purposeful. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice low. "If you don't feel the same way, just tell me, and I'll never bring it up again." I couldn't speak. My heart was racing, my thoughts spiraling into chaos. But I didn't pull my hand away. He stepped closer, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I just need you to know." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I saw everything he wasn't saying, years of quiet admiration, longing, and something deeper than either of us could explain. And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or forceful. It was soft, tentative, as if he was testing the waters. For a split second, I froze, every rational thought in my head screaming at me to push him away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my hands gripping the edge of the counter as his lips moved against mine. There was a heat between us, a spark that I hadn't felt in years, and it terrified me as much as it thrilled me. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my mind reeling. "We can't do this," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't care," he replied, his gaze unwavering. After that kiss, everything felt surreal. I told him he needed to leave, that we both needed time to think. But even as he walked out the door, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. I paced the kitchen for what felt like hours, my thoughts a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and something I couldn't quite name. I knew how wrong it was. I'd been friends with Claire for decades, and Liam was practically family. This wasn't just crossing a line. It was obliterating it. But there was another part of me, the part I didn't want to admit existed, that felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I told myself it was a mistake. That night, I convinced myself I'd let the moment get the best of me, that it was a one-time lapse in judgment. But when Liam texted me the next morning, my resolve crumbled. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my fingers hovering over the screen. I knew I should say no, that letting this go any further would only make things worse. But instead I typed, "Come over." When he arrived, I could see the nervous energy radiating off him. He stood on my porch, hands shoved into his pockets, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "Hi," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. "Last night," I started, but he interrupted me. "Wasn't a mistake," he said firmly. "It was," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. "Liam, you're young. This isn't what you think it is." He shook his head, leaning forward. "You keep saying that, but you don't believe it. I know you felt it too." His words left me speechless, my carefully constructed arguments crumbling under the weight of his certainty. "I don't know what this is," I admitted finally, my voice trembling, "but it's not something we can act on." "Why not?" he asked, his tone quiet but insistent. "Because it's complicated? Because people might judge us? None of that changes how I feel about you." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "What about your mom? What about Claire? Do you have any idea what this would do to her?" "I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this way anymore, and I don't think you can either." His words hung in the air, and before I could stop myself, I reached for him. I didn't know what I was doing, whether it was a moment of weakness or something deeper. But when our lips met again, all the fear and guilt melted away. This kiss wasn't tentative like the first. It was deeper, more urgent, a release of everything we'd been holding back. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself giving in to something I couldn't explain. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his, my breath shaky. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "I don't care," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm not letting you go." That night marked the beginning of something neither of us could stop. It was messy and complicated, filled with stolen moments and quiet confessions, but it was real. I knew we were walking a tightrope, that the secrets we were keeping could destroy everything. But when I was with him, none of that seemed to matter. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I wish I could say I stopped it there, that I came to my senses after that second kiss and told Liam we couldn't continue. But the truth is, I didn't want to stop. For the first time in years, I felt wanted. Not just noticed, but deeply, unflinchingly desired. It was intoxicating, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize or resist, I found myself falling deeper into something I knew I couldn't control. It was a week later when Liam and I crossed the line we could never come back from. Claire had asked me to house sit while she went on a weekend trip with Emma, and Liam stayed behind, claiming he needed time to work on his graphic novel. That Saturday night, he texted me, "Can I come over?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew what he was asking, even if he hadn't said it outright. I should have said no. Instead, I typed, "Yes." When he arrived, the air between us was electric. He stepped into the house, his presence filling the space, and I felt my pulse quicken. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice trembling. "But you let me come," he replied, his gaze steady. Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his hands sliding to my waist as he kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. His touch was confident, his lips moving against mine with a hunger that left me breathless. We didn't make it far, just to the couch in the living room. His hands were everywhere, his touch igniting something inside me that I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was wrong, knew we were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the room silent except for the sound of our breathing. "This is insane," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "But it feels right." And in that moment, I couldn't argue with him. After that night, things between us changed. We didn't talk about what we were doing or what it meant. We just let it happen, swept up in the thrill of something forbidden. Liam would come over late at night, slipping through the back door while Claire was asleep upstairs. We'd steal moments in the quiet of the kitchen, his hands on my waist as he kissed me like he couldn't get enough. Once, he pulled me into the hallway while Claire was in the next room, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "I can't stop thinking about you." "You're insane," I whispered back, even as I let him kiss me. "And you love it," he replied, his grin mischievous. He wasn't wrong. One afternoon, while Claire was at work, Liam and I met at a park on the edge of town. It was risky, but we couldn't resist the chance to spend time together without the weight of secrecy hanging over us. We found a secluded spot beneath a canopy of trees, the golden sunlight filtering through the leaves. He leaned against the trunk of a tree, pulling me close, his hands sliding to my hips as he kissed me deeply. "You're going to get us caught," I murmured, my hands resting on his chest. "Let them catch us," he replied, his voice low and rough. I laughed, shaking my head. "You're impossible." "And you're perfect," he said, his gaze softening as he looked at me. His words made my chest ache, a mix of longing and fear swirling inside me. I wanted to believe we could keep this up, that the bubble we'd created could last forever. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The boldest risk we took was during a weekend trip with Claire and Emma. We'd gone to a cabin in the mountains, a family getaway Claire had organized as a way to spend more time together. The first night, after dinner, Claire and Emma went to bed early, leaving me and Liam alone by the fire. We sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the flames filling the room. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said finally, his voice low. "Liam." I started, but he cut me off. "I mean it," he said, turning to face me. "Every time I see you, every time I'm near you, it's all I can think about." My resolve crumbled under the weight of his words. Without thinking, I leaned in, my lips finding his in a kiss that was equal parts desperate and tender. The risk of being caught only made it more exhilarating. We slipped outside, the cool night air wrapping around us as we found a secluded spot behind the cabin. His hands were on me, his touch sending shivers down my spine, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. But, for all the passion and intensity, there was always a shadow hanging over us. Every time I saw Claire, guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line I was crossing. "She's your mother's best friend," I said one night as Liam and I lay tangled together in my bed. "And you're the woman I love," he replied without hesitation. His words sent a rush of warmth through me, but they also brought a flicker of fear. This wasn't just a fling for him, it was something real, something that couldn't be easily undone. "What happens if she finds out?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She won't," he said firmly. "We'll be careful." But no matter how careful we were, I couldn't shake the feeling that our time was running out. It started with small things. Claire began to notice changes in Liam, his sudden absences, the way he seemed distracted during family dinners, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. "Is everything okay with Liam?" she asked me one evening as we sat on the porch, sipping wine. "Of course," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. "He's been acting strange lately," she said, frowning. I don't know if it's stress or something else, but he's not himself. I felt a pang of guilt, but said nothing, knowing that any explanation I gave would only raise more questions. The closest call came one afternoon when Claire left the house to run errands. Liam and I were alone in the kitchen, and I couldn't resist the pull of his presence. "You're going to get us caught," I whispered as he kissed me, his hand sliding to my waist. "Let them," he murmured against my lips. But just as things were heating up, we heard the front door open. "Mom?" Claire called from the hallway. We sprang apart, my heart racing as I scrambled to make it look like we were doing something innocent. Liam grabbed a dish towel, pretending to dry his hands, while I busied myself with rearranging the counter. When Claire walked in, she glanced between us, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I said quickly, my voice too high. "Just cleaning up." Her gaze lingered on us for a moment before she nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Every time we were together, I told myself it would be the last time. That I'd end it before the truth came out and everything fell apart. But every time I found myself going back to him, unable to resist the pull he had on me. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before our secret was exposed. Secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how tightly you try to keep them locked away. With every glance Liam and I exchanged, every touch stolen when we thought no one was looking, the walls around our secret began to crack. I should have known it couldn't last forever. It started with Claire. "You've been acting weird," Claire said one evening as we sat on her porch, sipping wine. I froze, my hand tightening around the stem of my glass. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, her brow furrowed as she stared out into the yard. "I don't know. It's like you're distracted. And Liam's been the same way. He's out all the time, doesn't tell me where he's going. When I ask, he just says he's working on something. It feels like he's hiding something." I forced a laugh, the sound unnatural even to my own ears. "He's in his 20s, Claire. It's normal for him to want some independence." "Maybe," she said, taking another sip. "But it's not just him, it's you too. You've been distant. Like there's something you're not telling me." My stomach twisted with guilt, but I plastered on a smile. "You're imagining things," I said lightly. "I've just been busy with work." She nodded slowly, but her eyes lingered on me a moment too long, as if she didn't entirely believe me. The cracks in our secret widened during another one of Claire's family dinners. The tension between Liam and me had been growing, and no matter how much we tried to act normal, it was becoming harder to hide. Claire was busy in the kitchen when Emma, Liam's younger sister, came into the living room and plopped onto the couch beside me. "Hey," she said casually, pulling out her phone. "You and Liam have been spending a lot of time together lately." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" she shrugged, scrolling through her phone. "I don't know, it's just, I've noticed the way he looks at you. It's weird." I laughed nervously, brushing off her comment. "You're imagining things." But Emma didn't look convinced. "Maybe," she said, her tone laced with suspicion. Liam walked into the room a moment later, his eyes flicking to me before quickly looking away. Emma's gaze darted between us, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Everything okay?" Liam asked, his voice steady but cautious. "Yeah," Emma said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Just talking about how you've been acting weird lately." Liam's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving me alone with Emma's lingering suspicion. The moment everything came crashing down happened a week later. Claire had planned a small get-together at her house, inviting a few close friends and family members for a casual dinner. I had promised myself I would keep my distance from Liam, but the tension between us was palpable from the moment I arrived. Throughout the evening, I caught him stealing glances at me, his gaze lingering a second too long. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on chatting with the other guests and helping Claire in the kitchen. But the more I tried to avoid him, the more I felt drawn to him. After dinner, while Claire and the others were cleaning up, I stepped outside for some air. The cool evening breeze was a welcome relief from the heat of the crowded house. I heard the door open behind me and turned to see Liam stepping out onto the porch. "We need to stop this," I said quietly, my voice trembling. He didn't reply. Instead, he closed the distance between us, his hand brushing against mine. I can't, he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. I won't. Before I could respond, he kissed me, his lips capturing mine in a way that made my knees weak. For a moment I forgot where we were, forgot the risk, forgot everything except him. And then I heard it. The sharp intake of breath, the sound of a glass shattering on the porch. We broke apart, turning to see Claire standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. What the hell is going on? She demanded, her voice trembling with anger. The silence that followed was deafening. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Liam stepped forward, his hands raised as if to calm her. Mom, please. Don't, she snapped, her voice shaking. Don't you dare try to explain this. Her gaze shifted to me, her eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. How could you? She asked, her voice breaking. You're my best friend. You've been like family. And this is what you've been doing behind my back. Claire, I'm sorry, I said, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't supposed to happen. I never meant to hurt you. Hurt me? She repeated, her voice rising. You've been sneaking around with my son. Do you have any idea what this means? What this could do to our family? Mom, it's not like that, Liam said, his voice firm. I love her. Claire's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. You what? I love her, he repeated, his voice steady. And she loves me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. He had never said it out loud before, and hearing the words now, in the middle of this chaos, felt both exhilarating and devastating. Claire stared at him, her face a mix of disbelief and fury. You're confused, she said finally. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Liam said, his tone unwavering. The rest of the night was a blur of shouting and tears. Claire demanded that I leave, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I can't even look at you right now, she said, her eyes burning into mine. You've destroyed everything. I tried to explain, to make her understand that this wasn't some careless fling, but she wouldn't listen. You betrayed me, she said, her voice breaking. You betrayed all of us. As I walked out the door, my heart felt like it was shattering into 1,000 pieces. That night, I sat alone in my living room, replaying everything that had happened. The weight of what I had done was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, the hurt, the betrayal, the disbelief. Liam texted me, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. I needed time to think, to process everything that had just unfolded. I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt like living in the aftermath of a storm. Everything was quieter, but the damage was impossible to ignore. Claire didn't call, didn't text, and I didn't dare reach out to her. I stayed in my house, replaying the events of that night over and over again, wondering if there had been a way to stop it before it all spiraled out of control. But the truth was, once Liam and I crossed that line, there was no way to undo the inevitable. Liam called me every day, leaving messages when I didn't answer. Please talk to me, he said in one of them, his voice strained. I can't just let this end like this. I need to know you're okay. I wasn't okay, and I didn't know how to tell him that. I finally answered one of his calls a week later, my voice shaking as I said, Liam, I can't do this right now. Can't do what? He asked, his voice softer now. Any of it, I said, tears threatening to spill. Claire hates me. Emma probably hates me. And you've lost your relationship with your mom because of me. That's not your fault, he said firmly. I made my own choices. But I should have stopped this before it got to this point, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't, and now everything is ruined. There was a long pause before he spoke again. Do you regret us? He asked quietly. The question hit me harder than I expected. Did I regret it? The passion, the connection, the way he made me feel alive? No, but I couldn't ignore the cost. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire's silence was the hardest part. For decades, she had been my closest friend, my confidant, the person I could always rely on. Now I felt like I was mourning the loss of a piece of myself. I tried writing her a letter, pouring out everything I couldn't say in person. How sorry I was, how much I valued her, how I never meant to hurt her. But when it came time to mail it, I couldn't. It felt selfish, like trying to absolve myself of guilt that wasn't mine to forgive. Weeks turned into months, and though I saw Claire occasionally at community events or in passing at the grocery store, we didn't speak. She avoided my gaze, and I didn't have the courage to approach her. Emma, like her mother, kept her distance. She didn't know all the details, but she knew enough to look at me with a mix of confusion and disappointment. Chloe was even colder. Her anger at Liam had only grown after Claire found out, and she refused to speak to him at all. Liam told me about their strained conversations, how Chloe would leave the room whenever he tried to explain himself, how Claire had barely said more than a few words to him in weeks. "She won't even look at me," he said one night over the phone. "I don't know how to fix it." Neither did I. Eventually, Liam and I started to drift apart. It wasn't a conscious decision. There were no dramatic breakups or tearful goodbyes. But the weight of what had happened, of what we had done, began to suffocate whatever it was we had shared. We stopped texting as much. The late-night calls became less frequent. And then one day, he didn't call at all. I told myself it was for the best, that we needed time to heal, to figure out how to pick up the pieces of our lives without each other. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Months later, I ran into Claire at a coffee shop. She was standing in line ahead of me, her hair pulled back and her expression tired but calm. I hesitated, debating whether I should turn and leave before she noticed me. But then she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then, to my surprise, she gave me a small, tentative nod. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Hi," she replied, her tone neutral. I wanted to say so much, to apologize again, to tell her how much I missed her. But I knew that wasn't what she needed. "How's Emma?" I asked instead. "She's fine," Claire said, her gaze softening slightly. "And Liam?" I hesitated, unsure how much she wanted to hear. "I think he's okay. He's been focusing on his art." She nodded, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before she said, "I'm not ready to talk about everything, but maybe someday." "Okay," I said softly, my chest tightening. "Whenever you're ready." I don't regret Liam, not entirely. What we had was real, and it brought something into my life that I didn't realize I'd been missing. But it also came at a cost I wasn't prepared to pay. Claire's tentative words at the coffee shop gave me a sliver of hope that we might rebuild our friendship someday. But I knew it wouldn't be the same. Some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. As for Liam, I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Maybe he'll find someone his own age who can love him without the weight of guilt or secrecy. Maybe I'll find peace in knowing that, for a brief moment, I meant something to him. Life doesn't give us clean endings. It gives us messy, complicated, imperfect moments, and we have to figure out how to live with them. And so I do.